new mini-series, Old and Obscure, which is kind of a reference to me. I realised the other day that I'm nearly 60, and of course a lot of the books which to me are famous and everybody's read and what have you, and not to those of you who are a bit younger, or those of you who sort of engage with the sort of more bestsellery sort of SF. So I thought I'd talk about a few sort of old classics really that you might have missed. And we're going to start with Rogue Moon by Algis Budrys. This is a little edition from the late 80s in Golanc's classic SF, which was the precursor of Golanc's Masterworks, which you all know and love. And yeah, this is a fantastic one. This is sort of like in all the reference books, as I say, and Robert Silverberg says on the cover, the most terrifying pages in any science fiction novel I have ever read. So there you go. And yeah, very beautiful stuff. And I reread that a while ago after a big sort of hiatus. I read it back when this edition came out, and this sort of goes in and out of print. It's always out there. Algis Budrys sort of lives in America, 1931 he was born. And he was, I think he was actually born in East Prussia. He's a European emigre, as so many of the older SF writers in the States were. They always have these wonderful names which really sort of like don't sound like anybody else's, like Asimov, and you know, Budrys is typical of that sort of thing. And Rogue Moon, great title, is regarded really as sort of a precursor of New Wave SF. And it was published in 1960. I'll talk to you a bit about the plot. It's about an alien artifact which is sort of quite large, and it's been found on the moon, discovered there. So, you know, in that sort of 2001 sort of dumb object territory. And it's more like a maze. It's a maze-like object. And the only way that it can be explored by human beings without them being killed is by transmitting duplicates of people into it. So there's a duplication process that people can go through on Earth and then be transported to the artifact to explore it and to try and find out what it is. This is very enigmatic. The duplicate beings effectively die during the exploration, so it's like a trap that instantly kills. It's usually within a few seconds of entering the object, but before they pass away, before they're killed, they sort of maintain telepathic contact with the original sort of person on Earth, and the originals experience the deaths of their other selves, their doppelganger selves, and the ordeal usually, unfortunately, drives them insane. So a lot of information is leaching through. But there's one man who seems to be immune to these traumatic effects of witnessing the death of the duplicated self, and that's a guy called Al Barker, who is sort of a confirmed risk taker, and he's a devotee of extreme sports, and he is repeatedly duplicated. His duplicate is transmitted into the artifact, and time again we see this process going through, and the duplicate enters the maze and dies, and Barker experiences it. But each journey that he undertakes, or his dupes undertake, bring a little bit more information about the artifact back to Earth, and eventually the maze-like structure is mapped. Now Barker is kind of bloody-minded, he has perverse courage, and he has a lot of faith in the science of Edward Hawkes, the man who created the machinery to transmit the duplicates to the moon. And that faith is justified. Now, it is quite sort of hard-boiled in its style. It's quite tough. It borrows a certain tone from those sort of crime novels of Chandler and Hammett and Kane. And it's a very terse read, you know, it's good stuff. And I would say it's well worth reading, and you do see some of the concerns the New Wave coming into it, particularly the sort of attitude and the prose. He was never really that prolific a writer. He did a lot of editing work, a lot of short stories, and I would say in some ways his short stories are maybe better than his novels, but you know, he is really good. And the thing with Rogue Moon is it's really compelling, and what's gripping about it is the analysis of the complicated psychologies of the central characters as the plot unfolds. The image of the enigmatic alien artifact and the purpose of which, well, I'm not going to tell you whether it's discovered or not, and the sort of deranged level of determination which Barker has as he resurrects himself over and over again, and Hawkes, the scientist, has this indomitable belief in the power of the human mind to overcome all the obstacles that are in man's way, and it sort of stays with you a long time after the book's finished. So it's a really, really great one. And Budrys is probably his most famous book. He did a lot of sort of work on the Writers of the Future contest, which was of course associated with L. Ron Hubbard, so I don't think that did him any good. He, as a critic, he was quite prominent. He talked about how in the late 60s, there's a famous quotation that appears in a lot of Delaney's books, just said, Samuel L. Delany is the greatest science fiction writer in the world at that point. I would point out briefly another Budrys which I really, really rate, and that's a book called Michaelmas, which to me is one of the founding books of cyberpunk. Not the punk part, but certainly the cyber part. And I would say do look out for that as well. This is a Gollancz UK hardcover first. And you used to be able to pick this up in Britain fairly easily. Now, a lot of these things I'm going to show you in these videos are often available as ebooks if you can't get them secondhand. Gollancz Gateway, which is a UK thing, they often come up as Kindle ebooks as well on Amazon. I'm not sure about the States, so you have to research it yourself. This is a good one as well. And this is about a guy who's a journalist who effectively runs the world with an AI in a briefcase and nobody knows. And that's great stuff as well. So Michaelmas, that's one to watch out for. Really great stuff. So that's Algis Budrys. Somebody else who's an old favourite of mine, who I've talked about on the channel many times, but I decided to revisit this, is Barrington Bayley. Now, Barrington Bayley stuck to sort of pulp forms. He did sort of space operas and time travel and those sort of things. A lot of his books were published in Door in the USA. In the UK, he was published by Fontana, Allison and Busby, what have you. And Barrington Bayley had a bit of a career writing comics in the 50s and 60s as well. And he was always very chummy with Michael Moorcock, and his stuff used to appear in New Worlds magazine. Was Barrington Bayley a new wave writer? He kind of was in spirit, but what he was really good at was very Baroque and Rococo SF. And this is my favourite book by him, and I do love his stuff. And he's sort of like a really intelligent entertainer with attitude and verve. And I'll tell you a bit about this. The Garments of Sayan, I guess that's how you say it, is a book, where really sort of the clothes make the man, that old sort of cliche. This is a Fontana one from the late 70s, and as Moorcock says on the cover, the most original SF writer of his generation. And I would say that, he was great. He had a terrible situation with a court case where he wasn't getting his royalties out of Allison and Busby, and he had to sort of go and work as a miner, and he died quite young. And it was a groundbreaking case because it meant that it was easier for writers to get the royalties out of the publishers and what have you, but it did damage his career. So just to tell you about the Garments of Sayan, it's set in the Zyode cluster, and it's tailoring, which is a sort of mundane occupation. And Peder Forbath, who is the protagonist of the book, he's just a tailor, and it sort of ensures that just by being a tailor, he's like a man of slender means, and he's insignificant to the rest of the society in the Zyode cluster. But he looks at somewhere called Sayan, which is a neighbouring galactic spiral arm, and there clothes are more than mere vestments. They're a way of life. They encompass not only a human being's philosophy, but they expand his supernormal potential as well as that to boot. And so while the Garments of Sayan are illegal in the conservative Zyode cluster, Forbath decides that what he wants to do is elevate his sort of mundane occupation of tailoring to its highest potential and become known as a sartorial. And a sartorial is the designation that tailors enjoy in the culture next door in Sayan, in that different spiral arm of the galaxy. So he falls in with this sort of foppish character who's always sipping liqueurs, and he's a bit of a chancer. This character is called Rialto Mast. And with Rialto Mast, Forbath participates in an illegal salvage mission on a frontier planet, and he raids a wrecked cargo ship which contains a stash of Sayanic couture, so it's clothes from this other culture. And the duo then, Rialto Mast and Peder Forbath, are going to fence these clothes on the black market, but unknown to the villainous Mast. Mast is a little bit of a chancer, as I say. Peder's kept the very prize of the haul for himself, and it's not like a pair of jeans. It's a legendary Franchenard suit, and the Franchenard suit is a very rare bit of Sayan sartorialism, a rare bit of tailoring. And there's only 5 of them in existence, and they're very, very, very prized, even in the sort of voguish style, clothes, fashion-obsessed Sayan culture. And soon Forbath finds that his personality and his fortunes are transformed by this enigmatic garb. But Mast learns of the deceptions, and he initiates a pursuit that leads to a galactic odyssey in which the clothes really do make the man. And the Garments of Sayan is colourful, it's fast-moving, it's witty, and it's kind of typical of Barry's inventive approach to traditional SF. I mean, this is the thing, clothes, he just takes an idea and he makes it the center. And we tend to think of clothes as being superficial, but they are important. They're not just important as sort of protection, what have you. They signal all sorts of things culturally. So this is looking at the culture of clothes, and it also has kind of a superhero element in a way, if you like. So it's a great fun read, and very colorful and rococo and baroque and spiky. And he's got this really vivid prose style, and the characters are really engaging, they really stand out. And it's got a kind of affinity with Alfred Best, M. John Harrison, and with Moorcock as well, I would say. And overall, I would say that Bayley is, or was, sadly, he's no longer with us, he's one of the most vital and entertaining of the sort of British writers from this period, 60s, 70s, early 80s. And he tackled perennial subjects: space opera, time travel, robots, aliens. And the manner in which he did it is really refreshing, and it leaves the majority of genre SF for similar kinds just standing. When Bayley has zoomed off, he's already in sixth gear by the sort of second page, while everybody else is still clunking about with their sort of big dumb objects and what have you. So this is one of his more playful works. Some of them are darker and more serious, and he's equally at home with that. And his affiliations with New Wave meant that he did some very experimental short stories, which are in a book called The Night of the Limits, which is great stuff. So he manages to take things which even by the early 80s had been worn thin with overuse, and he found surprising takes on them. So he's a really great little writer, and he deserves your attention, and there's lots of fun out there. They're getting harder to find in the UK because his reputation is spreading at last. There's a really great one called The Grand Wheel, which is about gambling, and it reminds me of the kind of things that Philip K. Dick and Barry Milesburg did that way. So that's The Garments of Saying, so watch out for it. I say there may be an ebook out there, and I say most of these were published, in Door in the States, and some of Barry's books are quite rare now and expensive. There's even a couple I haven't got myself, and I've been a fan for decades and decades. So Barrington J. Bayley, The Garments of Saying, fantastic stuff. That's in my book 100 must-read science fiction novels. Just a little hypey thing there. Also Rogue Moon's in it as well. I'm going to move on now to talk about one of my favourite British SF writers, who recently, my friend Matt at Bookpilled, Matt and I were chatting, and he said, I can't think how it came up. I was doing a book haul, and I'd been to Dorset Bob's. If you look at my most recent book haul with Dorset Bob, Mr. Book 451, I had a load of things, and I had a couple of D G Comptons which were upgrades, books I already had but not in very good condition, and I bought sort of new copies, or not new, they're old, but they're better copies from him. And Matt said, I've actually got that one you bought there, Farewell Earth's Bliss. I have that. Is it any good? And I said, yeah, Compton's fantastic. He's a great writer, and I always think of him as famous still, because he was quite famous back in the 70s and early 80s. And he said that early to mid 80s his career kind of leached away a bit, really. So this is the first edition of his most famous book, The Continuous Catherine Morton-Hoe, and this one is in print in the USA from New York Review Books Classics. I don't have their edition because it's copyrighted for the UK. I do want to get one, it's beautiful, but when you've got a first you don't really need it. And The Continuous Catherine Morton-Hoe, I say, is his most famous book, and it was his big breakthrough. It was made into a film called Death Watch by Bernard Tavernier in the early 80s. So what's the story with this? Well, Matt, he reviewed Farewell Earth's Bliss on his channel, and people seem to really go for it. So I've been meaning to do a Compton roundup, and I'll do a roundup for you at some point. But I just thought I'd talk about this one because this is the one that's easiest to get, because you can get it new and you can get an ebook in the UK. Now, D G Compton at this point is still alive. He's about 92. He hasn't published anything since late 80s, and he used to write crime novels as well as Guy Compton. He also wrote Gothics as Francis Lynch. Those are pretty scarce books. They're still out there just about. But, he had an interesting career. Never wrote many short stories. In the States, it was called The Unsleeping Eye, and the film was called Death Watch. But the MYOB Classic Edition, which you can get in the States, in the UK, so Golack's masterwork, is still called The Continuous Catherine Morton-Hoe. So this is about a guy called Rod, who's a television reporter. It's set in the near future. The book was published in 1974. And Rod is used to sort of treading the line between journalistic objectivity and vicarious involvement. Your sort of cliched thing you get in films and TV where journalists have to wheedle their way into people's confidence to get the real dope and what's happening and what have you. So he's sort of used to that, but there is a sort of moralist problem with that he has. And he takes a new assignment on the Human Destiny Show, which is a top-rated reality TV program. Now, when this was written, of course, there was no reality TV, and it's kind of the definitive reality TV novel. Slightly before that, a few years before that, you've got Bug Jack Barron by Norman Spinrad, which is an interactive TV novel, and you've got Nigel Neal's play The Year of the Sex Olympics, which is also way ahead of its time in terms of reality TV. But this is a really important one as well. And basically, the Human Destiny Show sort of follows the lives of people who've been victims in accidents, and the people who are mentally ill, and people who are terminal cases, because in this near future world, people rarely get sick. Most diseases have been conquered and are curable and what have you. So to see somebody who's ill, who's injured, who can't be fixed, who has mental problems which can't be sorted out, is an unusual thing. So it becomes a very vicarious sort of thing, and it shows you how the sort of society has gone where people are seeking that sort of catharsis. So already there's a sort of moral and ethical question that comes up big time. It's sort of quite unpleasant. So Rod, he agrees, for a certain sum, because money's involved, to have radical microsurgery performed on his eyes so that he can have a new angle on the human tragedies that the series is going to cover. He will no longer be in front of the camera presenting. He will be the camera. He has cameras imprinted in his eyes. And this is the sequel, which is entitled Windows. I'll show you that properly in a moment. And that was about the only sequel that Compton ever wrote. And it was because of the commercial success of the continuous Catherine Mortenho and the critical success as well. And the latest sort of subject of the Human Destiny Show is a woman called Catherine Mortenho, a middle-aged woman who is basically dying of a strange sort of cancer which can't be cured. And she's signed the contract to appear on the show so that it can follow her in her decline and into her demise. And she's absconded, she's changed her mind, she's run off with the money, and she's gone AWOL. She's actually gone missing and nobody knows where she is. And Rod then has the assignment to find her, gain her trust without revealing his true purpose, while the audience watches voyeuristically through his eyes. Now, Catherine Mortenho, as I say, is middle-aged. She's a 40-ish divorcee, suffering from this fatal disease. And, it's going to be compulsive viewing for people. So it's very, very unpleasant. And this is at the core what Compton does. He really was SF's great moralist. In the UK, we had great moralists and ethical writers in SF in Britain. We always have had, and throughout the world. There's lots of them in America as well. But Compton was particularly good at this, and he brought the literary standards and skill of a conventional social novelist to these sort of speculative scenarios. And so Rod manages to track Catherine down, and he's filming her through his eyes, and she doesn't know, and it's all being broadcast on the Human Destiny Show. And he has got to keep this from her, and he's got to fake this friendship, and it doesn't really work for him at all. And he gets to know Catherine, and he finds many parallels in what's happening with her with his own life, and he's estranged and separate from his own partner as well. And his partner is split with him because of the ethical compromises that Rod has had to make, And in the continuousness of his experience with Catherine, what Rod sees, he sees what millions of viewers of the Human Destiny Show can't see, because the broadcast is edited. With everything is edited. Even this video will probably be edited. And you're not seeing the naked truth, you're just seeing a version of it. And Rod really starts to struggle internally between growing compassion and a swelling self-disgust in his own action, which will eventually compel him to take some drastic action. And Compton's prose is like super fine. It focuses on the characters. He could have had a career as a mainstream novelist, but he was a writer of ideas. And as I say, he wrote crime and radio plays as well for the BBC, and also Gothics as well as Francis Lynch. And he really sort of, committed himself to SF from the mid-60s onwards. And if you like realistic settings in the near future, if you like people like John Wyndham, J.G. Ballard, his work is magnificent. And he's very good at bringing up the moral dilemmas faced by individuals who are confronted by the implications of new tech and changing times. And that's been his perpetual interest. Though, there are some sort of classic themes like space colonization and aliens in some books. I think it's The Missionaries. It's quite a funny book about alien missionaries, or is it Earth missionaries? I can't recall it so well. But yeah, this was filmed as Death Watch in the early 80s. And I've just realised, I think it's in my book 100 Must Read Science Fiction Novels, which I'm glancing at now, and I put the date of the film 74, but it was actually more like 83. And it's a sort of art house film. It's not particularly successful. It's a little bit too po-faced and serious, but the novel is absolutely fantastic. And as I say, this was the sequel, and this is the Berkeley Putnam hardcover. Very beautiful, as you can see. And this is Rod's further adventures after he takes the drastic action, as I say, at the end of the continuous Catherine Morton. Oh, and there's DG on the back there. And as I say, he's still alive. He's in his 90s. Never met him. He hasn't had a novel published. I think the last one was late 80s, a book called Back of Town Blues, which was the third in a sequence of SF crime novels. It was only barely SF. So that's D G Compton, Barrington Bayley, and Algis Budrys for you. 3 authors who are well worth having a look at. Hope you've enjoyed that. More obscure old school stuff soon. Bye for now.